A certain funky trader has led many One Piece fans to question the story's power scaling system, but for many fans like myself, it led to an even bigger question. Does One Piece even use power scaling? This question led to a series of videos between two One Piece YouTubers, Grand Line Review and B.D.A. Law. Because both individuals make great arguments, you could watch the whole series and still wonder which person got it right. The goal of this discussion is to weigh the merits of each of their claims and then offer my own insight on the use of power levels. Essentially, their conversation comes down to three questions. 1. What is a power level? 2. Does One Piece even have power levels? And 3. Are those power levels reliable? Now, because their conversation is more than an hour long and this video is meant to be concise, I have linked each of their videos down below so you can watch them on your own. Make sure to comment with your thoughts on power levels in One Piece so that I can talk with you beyond the four corners of the video. With that out of the way, let's begin with our fundamental question. What is a power level? Well, in order to have any constructive conversation, both parties need to at least agree upon how to define the same ideas. For example, if I think a protagonist is great if they're OP, and you think a protagonist is great if they're relatable, we'll never reach a clear answer on whether a given protagonist is great because we'll use two completely different criteria. So we need a common definition for power level before we can say whether or not there is one. The best definition I could find actually comes from another YouTuber, Carthu's Dojo. In his video, linked down below, Carthu defines power scaling as the system used in fiction to determine how strong characters are. This process involves using the feats presented by the characters, connecting those feats in a meaningful way alongside statements, as well as remove any outliers. Using this allows us to generalize characters into categories. So if we use this definition, characters in a given anime will be placed into different power levels, and those power levels will be organized according to a particular feat of strength. This is about as solid a definition you'll find because it's consistent with anime that actually use power scaling. We know Black Clover uses power scaling because it offers a power system in which characters are placed in tiers, and those tiers are defined by one's ability to fight a demon. In contrast, we know JoJo's Bizarre Adventure doesn't rely on power scaling because there's no meaningful way to connect any feats that would allow us to place a given stand user in a power level rather than simply identify the nuances of their stand. It's important to define power levels based on feats because then, when a character accomplishes the necessary feat for a power level, we can then argue that this character could possibly overpower characters in the same tier. When there's no feat, tiers can't be used to power scale because there's no way to place characters into general power levels, and we can only rely on individual abilities and nuances. Carthu highlights the importance of feats when he makes a distinction between overpowering and outsmarting. He says, because as much as Batman may outsmart Superman to beat him, that still doesn't mean he can pull a planet. To use the Black Clover example, if Magma outsmarts Asta in a fight, this doesn't mean Magma is any more capable of killing a demon because he didn't actually overpower Asta. Without feats to define our power levels, those power levels can't be used to connect the relative strength of characters in any meaningful way, and we can only factor in respective nuances. So with our definition, now we can ask whether there's power levels in One Piece. Just to get it out of the way, each person notes the existence of Doriki used by Fukuro, but both acknowledge it doesn't serve as a reliable power scaling system because only Fukuro can measure it. Even so, it's still possible to place characters into general tiers. B.D.A. Law offers two reasons why power levels exist in One Piece. First, he claims without power levels, we're essentially saying all the characters are equal and anybody can win on any given Sunday, which is not the case at all. Second, he defends the use of titles as power levels and says it's a quick way to communicate and say, hey, this character is this level, and then you get into the nitty-gritty about why you think a character is a certain level. As he points out with his first claim, there are clear levels of general power in One Piece that everyone understands at least to some extent. For example, you could never say that Buggy is capable of the same feats of strength as Kaido, because Kaido is obviously far stronger than Buggy. B.D.A. Law also points out with his second claim that these tiers alone cannot be used to determine a character's power level because you still need to explain why you think a character is a certain power level. Grand Line Review is initially dismissive of such general tiers in his first video, but then admits that he supports the idea of broad tiers if they allow for further discourse. Referring to our definition of power levels, so far the two agree that there are general categories to communicate that you think one character overpowers another, and that you need to connect these general categories in meaningful ways. What are those general categories? Well, there are lots of metrics in One Piece like bounties and hockey, but the two recognize that the most reliable power scaling system one could use is titles. Now we have to ask, are titles a reliable system of power scaling? And this is where the bulk of the conversation takes place. In his first video, Grand Line Review concedes that even though he thinks there is too much disparity within titles for it to be used reliably, the Admiral title could be used reliably because the members of that tier seem to demonstrate relatively the same power, as demonstrated by the Akainu and Aokiji fight. B.D.A. Law responds by claiming that there's actually a broad spectrum of power among admirals similar to that of other tiers. He says, so do you think Fujitora is around the same strength as Kizaru just because he's an admiral? I think that level, admiral level, there's a spectrum as well. So why are we willing to accept admiral level as a spectrum and not commander level? Here B.D.A. Law compares the admiral and Yonko commander levels by saying that there are spectrums of power within each tier, and so you can't just concede the admiral level as reliable when it has disparities in power just like the Yonko commander level. And on this point I completely agree, because assuming titles can be used reliably, you can't discount other tiers for the same problem the admiral tier clearly has. B.D.A. Law then clarifies this idea when he explains that titles are only thresholds that indicate characters below a given title cannot overpower characters of higher titles. But nobody actually thinks Caesar, or Foxy, or Sugar has a chance versus Cracker, Katakuri, or even Smoothie. They will get dominated. So that's where tiers and thresholds come in. These characters, we feel, they've surpassed a certain threshold for us to classify them on this level. B.D.A. Law claims that titles act to scale characters by demonstrating that character A cannot overpower character B until A can demonstrate that they've surpassed the same threshold as B. But this is where B.D.A. Law's argument falls short. How do you know when a character has surpassed that threshold? B.D.A. Law compares Cracker and Katakuri and claims Cracker is in the same tier as Katakuri because they both fought Luffy for roughly the same duration and difficulty. Overpowering a character in a given tier certainly supports a claim that the given character is of the same tier, but that alone doesn't offer us any comparable feat of strength to justify our rankings. In his response, Grand Line Review argues that the title system is unreliable because there's no meaningful way to connect them to a common feat of strength. He says, for example, if instead of Yonko level we called the characters like Whitebeard, Big Mom, Kaido, and Shanks Sky Splitters or something, then that would actually evoke some sort of decent meaning. It immediately clears up any debate about Luffy and Blackbeard being on Yonko level, and it does provide a solid, tangible basis of equality for all the characters who are included in it because they have all accomplished that particular feat. Here, Grand Line Review illustrates how there is no common scheme among the titles because they can't be meaningfully connected to a specific feat of strength. A power level has to connect to a feat of strength that dictates the common scheme, otherwise we don't gain any general insight when characters are overpowered. Let's go back to Black Clover. If next week Mimosa overpowers a demon, then we know she's more powerful than, say, Magma, because we know Magma can't overpower a demon. If Mimosa does this, then you don't need to consider her nuances to say she can overpower Magma, because her feat tells us she is categorically stronger than Magma. In this sense, power levels aren't just a way to quickly communicate different spectrums. They are also ways to tangibly quantify a given character's power. And that's the issue with One Piece. There's no common scheme that allows us to tangibly quantify a given character's power. For example, let's have Tama fight Kaido. No tricks, no allies, let's just throw him in the octagon and let him duke it out. Now obviously this is hard for her to actually get done, but it's possible for Tama to make Kaido eat one of her dango. If this happens, that's it. Kaido is a Zoan, and so Tama will have complete control. But this doesn't offer us a meaningful connection to any feat of strength Kaido claims. Tama can't jump off of a sky island just because she can overpower Kaido with her devil fruit. She also stands no chance against any of the other Yonko because her devil fruit is useless against them. Evidently, Tama's victory doesn't help to quantify her power in any tangible way. Now, the only way you could respond is by saying that Tama's devil fruit isn't a power, but just some sort of trick. But it's a devil fruit. It's not a kryptonite weapon that Tama invented to cheat the system. It's a valid use of her physical abilities granted to her by her devil fruit. If you downplay Tama's dango, then you open the door to a world in which anyone can arbitrarily label devil fruits as legitimate or illegitimate, and doing that defeats the whole purpose of fights in One Piece. In anime with power scales, you can use power levels to determine fights because the power levels are all determined by a common scheme of feats, and those feats allow you to quantify a character's power. In contrast, titles can't be used as reliable power levels because there are too many different ways a character can beat other characters with higher titles but can't at the same time claim their feats. The powers are all too nuanced, the spectrums are all too general, and there's no way to quantify power levels so that you can compare characters using feats of strength. This is why Grand Line Review ultimately presents the stronger argument, because One Piece truly is a rock, paper, scissors system in which the absurd amount of nuances that stem from the many devil fruits make it impossible to organize them into a quantifiable tier system. While B.D.A. law is right when he says that there are clearly broad thresholds in the world of One Piece, at the end of the day, these thresholds do not determine fights because any possible power levels can always be countered by the right devil fruit. This isn't to say that there could never be power levels in One Piece. If someone can present a feat of strength that tangibly quantifies the Yonko threshold, or any title for that matter, then I could see titles as a reliable power system. But because there is no feat of strength that quantifies these thresholds, and because these thresholds are so up in the air, a character's title is simply much less reliable than a character's nuances in determining who they can overpower in the world of One Piece. Anyway, that's it for this discussion. Hopefully I clarified the conversation and showed you why One Piece does not rely on power levels. If you'd like more One Piece discussions like this one, then subscribe to the channel so you can follow along with weekly videos. Thank you for watching, and I hope to hear from you soon.